few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale, but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45, but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened her door, and I got a quick peek. Her walls all had crosses painted on them in different colors and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting in no light at all. It was damp. Yellow-stained 50-year-old carpet, dog shit, and cockroaches everywhere. No dog, though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next day, I had my girlfriend staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed looking at us, sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy, but then the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor, and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night, and who knows how long she stood there. You should lock your door at night, she says, and walks out. The next morning, I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongues. She has a plastic bag in her hand with a rotting dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside, and I can smell death from the bag. At T's point, I'm scared shitless. She's obviously very insane. I go upstairs to knock on another person's door and ask what the hell is going on. The guy is as scared as me. Apparently, she broke into his apartment one evening as well, while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch staring at him, holding a power drill. At these days, I'm basically shitting myself. I call the cops, and they know all about her. Apparently, she's a violent schizophrenic, and she hasn't taken her meds, but they can't force her or enter her apartment without permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days, waiting for her to run out of cigarettes, when I hear her leave at 2:00 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven. I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution. And in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. I never see her again, but I still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep. When you think of Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, the last thing you'd think of was a horror story. But yet, here I am. It was the summer of 2014, and I was bored and home alone. So, naturally, I hopped on CSGO. I went to Dust Online to play some casual. It wasn't a very busy lobby. There was about 5 people on each side. I joined Terrorist, where I quickly discovered the only other person with a mic was a guy whose name was something like Smarties McFlurry. He sounded a lot older than me. I was 14 at the time. His name was Dave, and we got along well, and we played good together since we had the same number of skill. We eventually played more CSGO together and then friended each other on Steam. After that, he asked for some of my social media, and I gave him my Discord and Snapchat. Then on CSGO, Dave suddenly said he had to leave, and we could play more tomorrow. So I got off and watched some TV, and eventually went to sleep on the couch. I was home alone for the night. At like 1 a.m., I awoke and got a glass of water. Then I heard a Snapchat notification from my phone. Curious as to who was sending snaps at this time of night, I picked it up and saw it was from Dave. I opened it, and it was a picture of my front lawn and house. The phone and the glass of water fell from my hands to the floor, and my heart began to race. I was suddenly frozen, as if rooted to the spot. The darkness around me seemed to become thicker, and I swear I was seeing shadows all around me. Then I heard a knock at the glass. I turned to the back window, and there he was, the Dave guy, who looked a lot older and creepier than me. Without thinking, I ran to the back door, locked it. I also locked the front door. I could hear him calling to me through the window. Then I proceeded to run to the only windowless room, the bathroom. I stayed in there for about an hour, shaking and fearing the worst. I dreaded hearing the sound of Dave calling me again, a knock at the door, or even footsteps outside. I don't know how long it was before I fell asleep. The next morning, my parents arrived home, and I hesitated to tell them about my experience. I knew they would drop shit on me, but it wasn't just that. I was questioning whether or not I was dreaming when the Dave guy appeared at my house. I knew I had not been dreaming playing CSGO with him though. However, when I checked my phone, it was like he didn't exist. He was not on my friends list in CSGO. His Steam account was gone, his Discord was gone, and even his Snapchat was gone. All deleted. To this day, I still question my sanity about whether or not this Dave guy who I played CSGO with really existed. I know for sure we had chatted on the game, on Discord, and on Snapchat, but had he really come to my house? And why were all of his online accounts deleted? I really don't know. One day when I was about 6 or 7 years old, my mom had gone to my older sister's recital in Georgia, and my dad was at work. He was a pilot for some airline, so she left me and my older brother, who was only 12 at the time, at the sitter's house, which was a few blocks away from my house. My sitter, who I'm going to call Bev, was 19, and she was pretty much the best kind of sitter to a 6 to 7-year-old boy could ask for. She'd let us play games and stay up watching TV as long as we didn't bother her while she was on the phone with her boyfriend. We were watching TV, and we could hear something scratching the paneling on the side of the house. Naturally, we blew it off as a stray animal. So, we continued watching TV. About 30 minutes to an hour later, Bev ran into the living room and locked the front door and shut the blinds. We were curious as to what she was doing. Me and my brother, being kids, got scared and started crying. Then Bev said everything would be okay. It was just a peeping Tom. So, she took us upstairs, and we went to her parents' room with a Nintendo and some snacks. Stay put, and not to touch anything we didn't bring into the room. Not a minute later after she walked out of the room, we heard a loud crash and glass shattering in the room below us. The sicko had thrown a brick from the walkway through the guest bedroom window and managed to get in. I remember Bev running into the room and pulling us into the closet and telling us we were going to play a game of hide and seek, and to be very quiet. She got out of the closet and locked it from the outside latch and disappeared. Several minutes passed, and we could hear a grown man screaming, "Come out. Come out. Wherever you are. I only want to play." Then I heard what sounded like water running in the bathroom across from the closet. Then it shut off, and I heard Bev yelling something at the man. It was something like, "The police are on their way. You better get out of my fucking house now." Then we could hear loud, heavy footsteps sprinting out of the room, and then sirens wailing in the distance. Bev shrieked, and we heard a loud thud on the ground below us. Bev had managed to find an old wooden bat. As the man turned a corner to go out the front door, Bev swung the bat as hard as she could, knocking the man to the floor. Dazed, he got up and tried chasing her outside. But the cops had already arrived and tackled the man on sight. My mom came home immediately and took me, my brother, and Bev back to my house. A few years later, she explained that the man was a known sex offender and had escaped from prison. In the report, he was said to be carrying a rather large knife in his pocket and had a Saturday night special tucked away in the waist of his pants. This story is totally true. It happened to me when I was about 4 years old. My dad used to really like going on vacation with me and my family. One time we went to what I think was Big Bear, but I'm not sure. Anyways, we rented a cabin. I don't remember much, but I remember the inside of the cabin was beautiful. The furniture was all colorful and decorated in Christmas colors, but it was around Christmas time. It was very roomy, and it was 2 floors, and had its own den, kitchen, and bedroom. We arrived during the day, and everything seemed normal. When night came, however, we started hearing noises. It sounded like someone was shaking the front door knob trying to get in. I was the first to notice, and I told my mom, but she didn't believe me. Then she saw it, too. For a couple of minutes, the front door knob just kept shaking by itself, and we were too afraid to go look out the door. Then we heard another noise. It sounded like steel hitting steel. Then it stopped. My dad was afraid someone was trying to break in, so we packed up all of our things so we can leave. But before we did, my dad called the police and asked them to come search the premises. We exited out the back door because the noises were coming from the front. Our car was down the hill from the back of the cabin. I fell asleep in the car and woke up the next morning in a small, rinky-dink motel room that was nothing as roomy and beautiful as the cabin. I was so bummed. but I was quickly relieved we had left because later that day we found out who was making those noises. The police had arrived there and searched the outside and found nothing. Then they went inside and found a man that had 2 hooks instead of hands. He had been twisting the doorknob with his hook. Then he clashed his hooks together, and that's what we heard, was a steel on steel. We found out that about 5 minutes after we left the cabin, he successfully broke in and started searching for us. The police found bodies stashed in an upstairs closet. When we were on our way home from the motel, we stopped at a gas station near the cabin where the madman had tried to break in. My mom knew it was a bad idea, but my dad told her to relax. The cops took care of that guy. He's nowhere near us. We all went into the little shop to buy some candy and snacks. We were quite surprised when we came out of the shop and headed back to our car. There was a note on the hood that read, "There's more of us. See you soon." It's safe to say that we never went back to that cabin again. This story happened when I was 18 years old and a senior in high school. It was an ordinary night. My dad worked the night shift, so we all decided to sleep in my parents' room. I was with my younger brother, who was 15 years old at the time, my younger sister, who was 11 years old, and my mom. My parents' room was a small, purple, square-shaped room, which also had a bathroom. The bathroom's door was across from the bed. My younger brother and I slept on my parents' bed, while my mom and my younger sister slept on the floor. Before sleeping, we all had a short conversation, and after that, we went to sleep at 9 p.m. at 2 a.m. I was awakened by a strange sensation. As I opened my eyes, I had my eyes fixed on the bathroom door, which was cracked open. To my surprise, I noticed a black figure, which looked exactly like my younger brother. The figure stood there with his arms crossed, watching me. However, his eyes were shut. At that moment, I froze. I couldn't move from the bed, and I was scared that if he opened his eyes, he would have red or bloodshot eyes. I decided to quietly turn my head to the other side of the bed to see if it was indeed my brother. My heart sunk to my stomach when I realized that my brother was sleeping right next to me. So many thoughts kept racing through my head. Who is this person? How could he look exactly like my brother? I tried as hard as possible to sleep and ignore what I saw. A few minutes later, after opening and closing my eyes, I was shocked to see that the figure was now standing above me, still looking right into my eyes with his eyes shut. My eyes were wide open from the shock. I felt like I was going to die from a heart attack. I felt as if he was starting to open his eyes, which scared me and caused me to close my eyes and force myself to sleep. Forcing myself to sleep worked, and the next thing I knew, it was morning. When he woke up, I headed to the living room and saw my mom. After holding it inside for a bit, I gave up and told my mom about the incident. I almost froze when she said she saw the same exact figure and witnessed what happened. It was terrifying. We both saw the same black figure that looked exactly like my brother. It was as if he was my brother's twin. We lived in that house for 2 more years until we finally moved out. After the move, we told my dad about this story because he doesn't like hearing creepy stories. So, we kept it a secret until we moved. He surprised us by saying that we were not alone. He saw some strange things in that house as well. One day when I was in the 6th grade, on a rainy day, I was walking home. On my walk, which was about a mile or so long, I had to walk through a cemetery. Not a stereotypical, shabby, haunted one, but one that had many people walking through and was usually full of maintenance employees. I remember walking by a group of them, sitting on benches, on a break. I thought nothing of it as he stood up and started walking at a fair distance. After a bit, I looked back at him, and he looked down quickly. He was in the same baby blue uniform as the others, and had a gray beard. But I made out a name tag. Frank P. as the other workers faded from sight. He was still behind me. I began to worry. A moment later, he called out, "It's wet, huh?" in a friendly voice. I chuckled politely and agreed. My worries increased a second later when I walked out, and he was still behind me. I was close to my house now, and it started to pour. My house in sight. I started jogging to get there. I glanced back, and I saw the man, visibly angry, start running. As my house got closer, I began to sprint. I didn't look back as I slung the key out of my backpack and opened the door. I looked behind me. I saw the man in the middle of the street. I walked over to the phone and dialed 911. Before I called, I looked out the window. He was gone. I told my mom what happened when she got home. She didn't believe me. That night, I couldn't sleep. There was lightning outside, and I could see occasional shadows from the flashes through my window in my living room. I lay watching the flashes when I saw a strange outline. I looked closer and saw an outline of a man. I stood up and walked out of my room. I walked into the living room. It was completely dark outside. I stood in the doorway and waited. A car's headlight illuminated the pale, shallow face of Frank P. I ran into my room and locked the door. Never saw him after that night. But whenever I see that baby blue uniform, I think back to that night and that haunting image of a skeletal, unnatural face of Frank P. I was 10 years old, and I was home alone. But that wasn't a big deal, because we lived in a small city. My mom and dad were at my grandma's house. I couldn't go, because I was sick. It was around 9 p.m. when I was about to go to sleep. My room was really small, and it only had one window facing my bed. That window to me was kind of scary, because when you're a little kid, your imagination can sometimes go wild. At that time, it wasn't my imagination though. Like I said, I was about to go to bed when I heard a loud scream coming from outside. It was really scary, but I tried to be quiet so I could listen to what was going on outside. Nothing was happening, though. It was really quiet, like nothing had happened at all. Quieter than normal, actually. Some time had passed, and everything seemed okay, so I just laid down and tried to sleep. 1 hour later, I heard that loud scream again. But this time it seemed to be closer. I froze. I was so freaked out, I couldn't even move. 30 minutes later, again, the same scream. At that point, I was about to cry. I don't know why, but that scream wasn't just a scream. It was at this high pitch, and it was just so creepy. Finally, 15 minutes later, I saw something at that window. It was a really skinny woman, and she seemed so happy for some reason. She was smiling, and her smile was so big and creepy. When I saw her, I started crying, and she started screaming again. I was horrified. She was just looking at me, smiling and screaming for the whole night. The next morning, my parents came back home, and I told them everything. They called the police, and the police found out that my window that was facing my bed was broken. But it didn't seem like it was broken with some sort of weapon, but as if it were broken by a really high pitch. I was 10 at the time this happened. I loved my bedroom since it had a TV, a bed, and a closet with my computer on my desk. One night, when I was sleeping, I heard a noise coming from my closet, which kind of woke me up. I didn't mind it at all because I was still trying to fall back asleep to go to school tomorrow. 3 hours later, after I woke up and ate breakfast, I was getting ready to pack my bag, which was in my bedroom for school. When I got in my room and packed my bag, I looked at the window and saw some tall black figure with a hoodie outside of my bedroom window. My heart dropped. And when I said, "Who in the world is that?" the figure ran away. I didn't see the figure's face since he was wearing a black hoodie, and it was a little dark outside since it was 5 o'clock a.m. In the morning, after I came back from school, I was on my phone researching for my school project. Suddenly, I heard a loud tap on the window. It was that figure again, and this time I saw his face. He was a man in his late 40s. He had wrinkly skin and had black hair. He smiled at me and said, "Hey, want some candy? Come outside of your house, and I'll give you some." He laughed and waited for me to come outside. He ran to the front door and made a mistake by standing there, because my dad was going to go to work. And he opened the front door and yelled at him to get the hell off his property or I'll call the police. I rushed to my dad and told him he had been outside of my bedroom window stalking me. He was about to call the police when he realized he didn't want me to get scared that I was going to get kidnapped or something. So, he said he would install security cameras. The only reason why I did unscream when he was outside of my bedroom window is because that I thought it was one of my friends trying to study with me. But I thought to myself, why the hell would any of my friends want to study at 5 o'clock a.m. in the morning, and none of my friends were really that tall. That night, I heard someone laughing in my closet. I didn't open my eyes, but I was scared to death since I heard that he was scratching the bedroom closet with something that sounded kind of like a knife. I waited a minute or two until I built up my courage to make a run for it and screamed for my life. Well, I ran to my parents' bedroom and locked the door. I explained to them what happened, and there was someone in my closet. My mom called 911, and the guy was saying stuff like, "Come out." and I won't make your parents watch as I stab you. And that was the thing that made me so scared, because my brain was alerting me that he did have a knife. Seconds later, we heard sirens, and me and my parents heard the police bust the door. Yelling, "Police, drop your weapon and put your hands up." Me and my parents were relieved that he was gone. I was very lucky that my closet was far away from my bed. It turned out that the guy was a crazy mental guy who escaped from his mental hospital by stabbing the security guards and breaking out. From now on, my parents have set up security cameras in each and every room and also outside. Who knows what would have happened to me if I didn't hear him laughing in my closet? Would I have been stabbed to death? Or what if he was hiding under my bed? Since that day, I still don't know how he got in my parents' house. Maybe my mom or dad forgot to lock the front door, or he got in from my bedroom window. When I was 19 years old in 1985 on New Year's Eve, a bunch of my friends and I went to a rooftop bar of a hotel. About a half hour before midnight, I ran down to my car because I had forgotten my camera. I figured I would have plenty of time to get back up there and find my friends. I grabbed my camera, and I got into an elevator all by myself. About halfway up, the elevator started shaking, and it stopped completely. I was trapped. I have always had a problem with confined spaces, so this was not an ideal situation for me. After a few minutes, everything went silent that was going on outside. Then out of nowhere, the elevator lights went out, and I started to hear children laughing. But this was not the type of place where children would be. My heart started beating faster and faster and harder and harder. Then all of a sudden I passed out. As I woke up, I noticed that I could not move or talk. I thought to myself, not sleep paralysis again. Then the light started to flicker on and off. And then all of a sudden, I see a black figure to the left of me in the corner of the elevator, crouching down, smiling at me. I tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I tried to move, but I couldn't. A guy came over the loudspeaker and told me there was an electrical short, and that he would have me out soon. There's a camera in the elevator, so did the security guard. It looked like I was just laying there. I guess they figured I was drunk, being that it's New Year's. Anyways, every attempt to scream or move, that figure would just start laughing at me and pointing. This whole time, the lights are flickering. Then all of a sudden, I can hear the huge crowds counting down for New Year's. Yes, the dark figure is staring at me, and now with a menacing smile, with 10 fingers up. 9. He's still looking at me with 9 fingers up, and he's moving closer. 8. He was still looking at me with 8 fingers up, and he's closer. 7. The same thing. 6. The same thing. 5. The same thing. 4. He's drooling, and he's much closer. 3. He's closer. 2. He was closer. Then the lights quit flickering, and it was pitch black. Then all of a sudden, outside went silent again. I felt breathing in my right ear, and then out of nowhere, I hear 1. I couldn't breathe. The lights started to flicker again. Then the figure was on my chest, and all of a sudden it was gone, and I can talk and move again. Usually when I have sleep paralysis, something bad happens. Once I got out of the elevator an hour later, I found out that there was a brawl during the countdown on the rooftop bar that I was at, and 4 people were killed by some maniac who was waiting until the end of the countdown to start hacking up people with a machete. Ever since then, I have not had a sleep paralysis episode. I was on a road trip with my friend Tom throughout upstate New York. On our second night of driving, we were taking some peaceful back road through the woods because we were tired of the noisy highway. So, as we were driving down this narrow, dilapidated road, Tom suddenly really needed to use the bathroom. I asked him if he could hold it, but he said that if he held it any longer, his bladder would explode. So, I just sighed and tried to find like a gas station or something. There was nothing to be seen, though, so I was thinking about pulling over and letting him piss in the woods. But finally, I saw lights cutting through the darkness up ahead. It was a 7-Eleven. Thank God. Before I'd even parked the car, Tom flew out the door and raced inside. I realized while waiting in the dark car, I was actually hungry. So, I pulled out some change from my pocket. It would at least be enough for a bag of crappy Cheetos or something. So, then I went inside. As I was walking through the store, examining everything on the shelves, I felt a tingly feeling on my neck, like I was being watched. I turned around and saw a bearded man in a yellow suit casually slip into the other aisle. I rolled my eyes, picked up a bag of Cheez-Its, purchased them, and walked out back to my car, looking at the dark woods behind the Tom had been gone forever, so I texted him, and he told me he was just finishing taking a huge shit, which was classic Tom. I was just crunching on my Cheez-Its when I heard somebody go. I quickly looked around, but saw nobody over here. Finally, I spotted a man peeking his head around a tree in the dark woods. His face was all dirty, and he had glassy eyes. We stood staring at each other for what seemed like the longest time until he said, "Come over here. I want to show you something." Hell no. I got in my car and locked the doors, texting Tom to hurry the fuck up. I told him there was a creepy weirdo outside the car, and he was all like, "All right, be right over." Later on, he walked out the doors and climbed into the car, and I hit the gas to get as far away from that fucked place as possible. As we were driving, I looked back one last time in the rearview mirror and saw 3 cloaked, bulky men standing in the trees surrounding the Needless to say, I still have no idea what the hell was going on at that place, nor do I ever want to find out. It was around 5:30 p.m. I was walking in the street to my dormitory since my home is far away from my school. There were only 3 to 5 people passing by that street at that time. While walking, I was texting my boyfriend, asking him if I could come over that night since I have a project to make, and my laptop's being an ass. It won't turn on, so I was hoping I could borrow his laptop. And then when I looked up, there was an old man walking towards me. The street was narrow, so I stopped and moved away to the side to make room for him when he did the same. I nervously laughed and moved to the other side, and he collared me again. This time, I felt a bit nervous. Excuse me, I muttered. I tried to get away from him, but he kept blocking my direction. Then he laughed and moved away. I felt relieved. I quickly walked past him, and then he stomped his feet behind me. I got startled, and then he laughed. I thought he was just a crazy old man. I told my boyfriend about it, and he asked me if I was okay, so I told him not to worry. Around 7 p.m., I was at the Jeep stop waiting for a Jeep to arrive, because I was going to my boyfriend's apartment since it was 45 minutes, and 2 rides away. 30 or 45 minutes later, there was one Jeep with only 5 passengers. So, I hopped in, one by one. The passengers got off the Jeep until I was the only one left. "Drop me off by the terminal, please," I said. He didn't say a word, just kept on driving. When we finally got into the terminal, he didn't stop. Just drop me off here, please," I told him again. Then I saw his face in the rearview mirror. It was the crazy man from earlier. I panicked. He was looking at me, smiling. I immediately called my boyfriend. Since we don't have 911 here, he wasn't picking up. I didn't know what to do. Should I jump off the Jeep? Then suddenly a group of friends halted the Jeep, and he stopped. I immediately got off and ran. I might have looked like a maniac to those teenagers, but I didn't care. I called my boyfriend again, who finally picked up. He had just got off from school, and I told him everything. He picked me up where I was, and since then he never let me travel at night. I'd been followed by creeps before, and in one case was almost assaulted. I was never truly scared about that type of stuff. I've been through a lot in my life, and I consider myself to be pretty strong. Even when some creep attempted to assault me, I wasn't scared because I knew I was going to beat his ass, and I did. I never feel threatened unless I get my gut feeling. I know when something bad's going to happen, or if someone is a shady character, etc. My friends tell me I have some type of sixth sense. I'm not one for superstition, but I also have to agree, it gets really weird, and I'm almost always right. One day, I got the worst gut feeling I ever had in my life. I was in my first year of college, living in some very nice apartments. I loved living there. It was a Friday, and I needed to head to the bank before it closed, because I forgot to cash in my check beforehand. I left my house, locked the door, and started heading towards my car. Right as I left the hallway of my apartment complex and started walking, a beat-up, crusty truck pulled up as if on cue. There were 2 guys inside. One was a pretty big guy with tattoos and looked like he just got out of prison, and the other one was super skinny with glasses. The second I laid my eyes on them, I had my gut feeling kick in. It was worse than usual, and I immediately felt like shit. The big guy was driving and started to tell me things like, "You're so beautiful. come over here. Let's talk. You're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I didn't want to walk to my car because I didn't want them to know what car I drive. And I didn't want to walk back to my house because I lived on the first floor, which is easier to break into. And if they didn't know already where I lived, I wanted to keep them from finding out. So I started walking to the front office of the apartment complex, which was a little far away. I already had my pocket knife out, but hidden in my sweater sleeve. They kept calling out, trailing me as I walked to the office. I kept my eye on them, so I knew what they were up to. They eventually asked me to go to a party with them. The big guy said, "We're having a party at 2:00 a.m. at a friend's house who lives here. Want to come? We can all hang out beforehand and get to know each other before we go." It was around 3:30 p.m. at the time, just for your information. I ignored them and told them, "No, stop bothering me." They kept trying to persuade me by saying nice things and stuff, and eventually they both said, "If you come with us, we'll give you a free pair of shoes." The skinny guy then leans back and starts digging around the back seat. I stopped to look because I wanted to make sure he wasn't going to grab a gun or duct tape or some shit like that. I was a good few feet away from the truck and took a running position just in case. He pulls out a dark blue suitcase from the back seat and opens it. Inside, there are maybe 100 different pairs of shoes. The sizing ranged from a small pink Dora the Explorer shoe to an adult-sized woman's stilettos. That's the moment where my gut feeling went into a frenzy. My knees became so weak. I threw up on the spot. I've never felt so sick and felt so disgusted in my entire life. I felt pure evil. Medno. And they became extremely angry and began to get out of the car. I booked it. In this street, my neighbor's little kids were playing outside. I snatched them up and ran all the way to the front office. No way I was going to leave these little kids behind with some fucked freaks. The minute we got there, I told the front office, and they called the cops, and I called the kid's mother. I told them that her kids were with me and not to leave the house in case they were still out there. I didn't mean them to find out where she lived either. After that, for the next few days, I was terrified to leave my house. So terrified, I had my friend come and stay with me for about a week. On the 4th day, we were getting ready to leave to go get food. And while I was locking the door, my friend sighed, "That's a shitty-looking truck." I turned around, and it was those guys in the truck right in front of my house. We ran back inside. Apparently, they had been stalking out my place for a while. They were never caught, and I never saw them again after the apartments cracked down on security. I learned about serial killers in school and found out some take trophies of their victims. I always thought back and wondered, what if all those shoes were trophies? Needless to say, I no longer live there. I am a 16-year-old girl. Years ago in the summer, I left my place in the city to visit my aunt and uncle's house in the suburbs of New Jersey. I mainly went to hang out with my cousin. Let's call her Kate. My cousin and I are 3 years apart. My aunt and uncle both worked in Manhattan. One day, my aunt and uncle decided to attend a party after work. During the day, Kate and I went down to the street to her friend's house because they had a pool. We spent all day swimming. When we walked back to her house, it was around 4:00 p.m. It was still sunny out. All of a sudden, Kate's phone stopped working. Nothing to worry about. I still had mine, and it was brand new. We spent another hour outside and figured it was time to call my aunt to tell her we were okay. On the steps, I pulled my phone out, but it was not working. We took the battery out, put it back in, but still nothing. With no way to call my aunt, we just went inside the house. It was maybe 5:00 p.m. Kate's older sister, Julie, a high schooler, was spending the night at her friend's house, so we were all alone. In the living room, we put the 2 sofas together, as we normally did when I slept over. We were both tired and ready to sleep. We had been left alone like this a lot of times, so it didn't faze us. The house is big and gets pitch black. All of a sudden, we heard a big bang that sounded like brass or metal coming from across the hall. We got up and checked Kate's room. Nothing had fallen. We went back to the living room to sleep. Maybe 2 hours later, we heard another bang coming from the room. We checked again. Nothing had fallen. This time, we were a little unnerved. We went back, but staged up and shortly heard a bang a 3rd time coming from the same room. We were nervous. We went on opposite sides of the hallway and walked in the room, this time like a little SWAT team. Everything was intact. We couldn't sleep after. We stayed up on the sofas and saw a shadow coming from the basement. The basement had no door. It was just open. No one was home yet. We called out for Kate's parents, and if they were home, they would have said something. Their driveway was empty. Their car wasn't there. We were terrified. Kate and I grabbed knives, and we just stayed down on the kitchen floor. Nothing happened. After another hour, we went back to the sofas. We woke up to the sound of a girl screaming, "Help me." We sprang up and heard someone banging on the door, but we were too petrified because we saw another shadow next to the shadow from earlier. Terrified, we just made sure the door was locked and went back to the sofa. After 30 minutes, we were woken up again, but this time to a police car and ambulance lights coming through from the living room windows. We were exhausted and went back to sleep. Sometime during the early morning, Kate's parents came home. We were sleeping and heard a huge bang coming from Kate's room. This time, my uncle came up from the basement, which is where my aunt and uncle's room was. He was holding one of his metal bats. He was ready to protect us. With my uncle in front of us, we all went into the room. Nothing was on the ground, and nothing had fallen. We knew we weren't crazy because even Kate's parents heard it. We never could explain what happened that night. The next morning, both Kate and my phone started working. After that day, I hated going to their house. I believe their house is haunted. Either that or someone was trying to come inside because they knew their car was in the driveway and they thought they could break in. My name is Jasmine. One night, my girlfriend and I were getting ready because we were going to head out for a night of fun. We got in the car, and I don't know what got into us. But we were feeling very flirty and decided to park at a parking lot to do our thing. We were in the car doing our thing. I was on her in the driver's seat while she had the seat reclined. When we were moving around, I accidentally honked the horn with my butt. I looked at my girlfriend and told her, "Hope that didn't draw any attention to us." She said, "It's okay. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I doubt anyone is awake." So, we continued. I kid you not. 3 minutes later, I put my head up to fix my hair and looked to my right. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a man on his knees just watching us. I quickly jumped off my girlfriend into the passenger side, screamed, and told her to drive off. As my girlfriend was trying to figure out how to put the seat up, the man got up and put his hands up. I got the most sickening feeling when I saw his hands were covered in blood. My girlfriend quickly locked the car door and got ready to drive off. Then the man told us, "Don't panic." I told my girlfriend to step on it, and when she did, I just remembered looking back, seeing his face get all mad and quickly walk away from the area. As we were driving off, I was sitting there asking myself if he murdered someone, could he be hurt? So, my girlfriend decided to drive back to see what the fuck happened. I didn't want to, but I thought maybe he needed help. When my girlfriend and I went back, we saw 2 cop cars pass the area coming from different directions. We were looking at each other, trying to figure out what was going on. When we drove back into the parking lot, he was gone. I don't know what he needed or why he had blood on his hands, but ever since that night, I always made sure my car door is locked. And now, I carry a taser with me. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my parents used to take me to this beach cafe in our town, Itadapul, and the cafe was right next to the beach. The family that owned the cafe were my family's close friends, so I spent a lot of my childhood there. The best part about the beach is that when you pass the cafe in the playground, there was a lot of sand and a net for volleyball. As kids, my friends and I would always play there. One ordinary summer night, there was quite a few of us playing in the sand, making castles and doing other things. All of a sudden, I heard a noise behind me in the bushes right where the sand ended. I should mention that there were woods around the whole place, but it wasn't deep or anything. I was a brave kid, so I just brushed it off as being a cat or animal of some sort and continued to play. However, when I looked up at my friends, who were now quiet and staying still, I got the chills. I noticed that all of their eyes had widened. They were staring at me, or rather at whatever was behind me. The shock kicked in, and I felt like I was going to faint. I started shaking. I didn't even want to turn around, but when I felt something cold on the back of my neck, that was the last straw. I started running full speed towards the cafe filled with people, and my friends immediately followed behind me. There were 6 children crying and screaming at the top of our lungs. I remember finally clinging to my mom and crying in her arms. Soon after, the sound of sirens, followed by police cars parked in front, filled the air. When the adults talked to the police, my friends and I were confused. I still didn't know what was behind me. So I asked my oldest friend in the group, who was 10 years old and talking to his dad. It turns out there was this crazy old guy who robbed a lady and stabbed her to death not so far away from here. My friends told me he appeared behind me, smiling like a sick clown. He was holding a knife and pressing it against the back of my neck. That must have been the cold thing I felt. From then on, I never stayed far away from the cafe when the sun went down. And thankfully, they caught the guy. I'm scared of the dark, and I have a good reason for it. You might be thinking, so, almost everyone is scared of the dark because something happened to them. Well, that is true for me, too. Here's my story. About 2 years ago, I ran away from home. I don't know just what I was thinking at the time, but I left with no food, no water, no belongings, and no coat. It was a very rainy day, and I sensed that I should either find shelter or I'd be soaking wet. So I decided to walk to my school and stay there for a few hours to dry off, as I was already wet and cold on a rainy day. As I arrived, I laid down my head and quickly fell asleep. And when I woke up, it was pitch black outside, and I could barely make out anything. I didn't have a watch or anything that tells the time, so I assumed it was midnight. At least it stopped raining, I thought. I decided to just go back home, as I wasn't far, and I was very hungry that time. As I got up, I stopped. There was something in front of me under a streetlight about 50 yards away. It was a man about 6 feet tall, and he was wearing a black coat with a hoodie over his face. So, I couldn't see his face. At first, I thought it was my dad who had come to look for me. So, I felt relief, but I didn't want to get into trouble, so I hid in a bush nearby and peeked out. The man was standing there and looked around for what it seemed like a half an hour. Then, under the light of the streetlight, he pulled something out of his pocket. I couldn't make it out at first, but then I realized it was a kitchen knife. Then he started to run toward the bushes. No, towards me. Exactly. I grew frightened and sprinted out of the bushes like an arrow. He already knew I was there. I didn't stop running until I got home without ever looking back. So, I survived. But to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I didn't run on that day. Or worse, what would have happened if I didn't wake up at the school. I developed my fear of the dark from this incident. It's so bad that now I have to sleep with the nightlight or the hallway light occasionally, because I'm afraid that the men whom I saw will kill me or kidnap me someday if I do unturn the light on. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my parents used to take me to this beach cafe in our town, Itadapul, and the cafe was right next to the beach. The family that owned the cafe were my family's close friends, so I spent a lot of my childhood there. The best part about the beach is that when you pass the cafe in the playground, there was a lot of sand and a net for volleyball. As kids, my friends and I would always play there. One ordinary summer night, there was quite a few of us playing in the sand, making castles and doing other things. All of a sudden, I heard a noise behind me in the bushes right where the sand ended. I should mention that there were woods around the whole place, but it wasn't deep or anything. I was a brave kid, so I just brushed it off as being a cat or animal of some sort and continued to play. However, when I looked up at my friends, who were now quiet and staying still, I got the chills. I noticed that all of their eyes had widened. They were staring at me, or rather at whatever was behind me. The shock kicked in, and I felt like I was going to faint. I started shaking. I didn't even want to turn around, but when I felt something cold on the back of my neck, that was the last straw. I started running full speed towards the cafe filled with people, and my friends immediately followed behind me. There were 6 children crying and screaming at the top of our lungs. I remember finally clinging to my mom and crying in her arms. Soon after, the sound of sirens, followed by police cars parked in front, filled the air. When the adults talked to the police, my friends and I were confused. I still didn't know what was behind me. So I asked my oldest friend in the group, who was 10 years old and talking to his dad. It turns out there was this crazy old guy who robbed a lady and stabbed her to death not so far away from here. My friends told me he appeared behind me, smiling like a sick clown. He was holding a knife and pressing it against the back of my neck. That must have been the cold thing I felt. From 10 on, I never stayed far away from the cafe when the sun went down. And thankfully, they caught the guy. I'm scared of the dark, and I have a good reason for it. You might be thinking, so, almost everyone is scared of the dark because something happened to them. Well, that is true for me, too. Here's my story. About 2 years ago, I ran away from home. I don't know just what I was thinking at the time, but I left with no food, no water, no belongings, and no coat. It was a very rainy day, and I sensed that I should either find shelter or I'd be soaking wet. So I decided to walk to my school and stay there for a few hours to dry off, as I was already wet and cold on a rainy day. As I arrived, I laid down my head and quickly fell asleep. And when I woke up, it was pitch black outside, and I could barely make out anything. I didn't have a watch or anything that tells the time, so I assumed it was midnight. At least it stopped raining, I thought. I decided to just go back home, as I wasn't far, and I was very hungry that time. As I got up, I stopped. There was something in front of me under a streetlight about 50 yards away. It was a man about 6 feet tall, and he was wearing a black coat with a hoodie over his face. So, I couldn't see his face. At first, I thought it was my dad who had come to look for me. So, I felt relief, but I didn't want to get into trouble, so I hid in a bush nearby and peeked out. The man was standing there and looked around for what it seemed like a half an hour. Then, under the light of the streetlight, he pulled something out of his pocket. I couldn't make it out at first, but then I realized it was a kitchen knife. Then he started to run toward the bushes. No, towards me. Exactly. I grew frightened and sprinted out of the bushes like an arrow. He already knew I was there. I didn't stop running until I got home without ever looking back. So, I survived. But to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I didn't run on that day. Or worse, what would have happened if I didn't wake up at the school. I developed my fear of the dark from this incident. It's so bad that now I have to sleep with the nightlight or the hallway light occasionally, because I'm afraid that the man whom I saw will kill me or kidnap me someday if I do unturn the light on. When I was 7, I had a really scary experience that I will never forget. I got up at 8 o'clock, a.m. as usual, but as I stood up, I noticed something was different. It was very cold, and I felt like someone was watching me. When I turned to my sister's bed, she woke up, and I screamed. 2 heads hovered in the air, one of an older woman with long, dark hair and green eyes, the other of a bald, older man with blue eyes. I screamed again and ran to my mother. I told her what happened and saw some man at the door. I can't recall what he looked like, but I screamed and hugged my mother when I saw him. I was crying at this point, and she looked at me as I pointed to the door, not explaining why. She instantly knew what I was upset about, and she spoke in the direction of the door. I don't know what she said. I was just too scared to listen, and all I wanted was to be somewhere else. Nothing like this happened to me again until I was 13. I was coming from my friend S' house and was really tired. I went to my room, turned the lights off, and went to bed. At 4 o'clock a.m. I suddenly woke up without a reason. When I looked at the door, I saw my mother looking at my sister. She had lifeless eyes, which reminded me of the incident that happened when I was 7 years old. The heads had the same lifeless eyes as my mother, except her eyes were red and just looked evil. I knew it wasn't my mom. I hid under the blanket, praying that the thing would just go away. When I looked up, it was still there. I prayed again. Then it vanished. I mean, literally vanished. I saw it with my own eyes. That thing grew fainter and fainter until I couldn't see it anymore. When it was gone, I ran to my parents and explained what happened. They believed me and said that if I couldn't go to sleep, I could watch TV or just stay up. I thanked them and went to the living room. Now I'm 14, and I talked to my mother about the incident that happened 7 years ago. And when I told her what the heads looked like, she seemed very surprised and confused. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that the description I gave perfectly matched that of my dead grandparents. I don't know if they were really my grandparents or who that man on the door was. It happened just a few years ago when I was hanging out at my cousin's apartment. There was a building in front of the living room window. That night, we were having so much fun and having a fun conversation. It was 7 p.m., and we noticed that there was an open curtain in the building just a few feet across from our apartment. I got up in my seat just to take a quick look at that window. I was just curious. Then I saw a woman. At first, I couldn't see her face because her hair was blocking it. Then I told this to my cousin. He was shocked about what I said. He told me to get his binoculars. Then he used them to look. Suddenly, he screamed in fear. I asked him why. He said, "What the heck is that?" Then I got the binoculars, and then I looked. My heart was pounding so hard. I saw a dead woman. Her neck was bleeding. Her blood was dripping out her yellow dress, and her body was hanging from the small chandelier. My cousin has military experience, and he got up the courage to go into that room. Before we went into that room, we told the guard what was there. So, we had 2 guards following us, and I told the one guard to follow me to our room so he could see what was in that window. And he was shocked, too. He radioed to his fellow guard that was with my cousin, and then we followed them to the next building. We also called the cops. When the police arrived, we struggled opening the door. When we got there, we all turned on the lights, and everything in there was all messed up. We opened the bedroom, and we saw the dead body hanging from the chandelier. 2 weeks later, the murderer was caught, and the police gave us a reward for helping to solve the case. However, to this day, I will always remember the horror we experienced. So, I'm a nurse, and I was driving home from work one night. The roads were deserted, and it was freezing that night. I don't live far from work, maybe a couple of miles. I'm driving down a residential street around the corner from my house, and I see a man laying face down in the street. Once again, I'm a nurse, so my first thought was great. Got to help this guy. I was coming off of a long shift, and falls happen all the time. As I slowed down the car, I suddenly realized what an idiot move it was. I'm a 100-pound woman, and I don't carry a weapon. I thought I should do something to help this guy, so I called 911. As I drove past him and slowed to a stop at the end of the block. While I was stopped at the light, I explained to the dispatcher that there was a man in the road who might need assistance. All of a sudden, I hear a loud bang-bang from the driver's side window. I screamed, and I looked over. A man was pounding on my window and jiggling the handle of my locked door. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that there was no man laying in the street anymore. "Still on the phone with 911? I screamed. "I'm so scared," to the dispatcher, and floored it through the red light. I quickly told him what had happened, and even though I was right by my house, he told me to keep driving. After a few minutes, I had calmed down, and he told me to loop back around. I pulled over down the road from my house, and I stayed in the car. I didn't see the man anywhere, so I got off the phone with the dispatcher, who told me he was sending a police car to cruise the area. As I gather up my things, I do a final scan of the area. Then I see the man. He is walking with 2 other men. I hunched way down in my car until they were further down the road, then bolted into my house. I don't know if he had ill intent, but it freaks me the hell out that he wasn't alone. Just always lock your doors. This story happened when I was in the 9th grade. I was going home after being at my friend's apartment. He's one of my good friends, so I often visited him. It was about 9:00 p.m. At night, usually, I went home at 5 or 6 when I visited him. But it was final exam week, so I went home later than usual to prepare for it together. He lives on the 15th floor. I took the freight elevator down because it was quicker than the passenger elevator. The elevator is kind of old, shaky, and not really well maintained. The fan isn't working. The walls are rusty, full of graffiti, and the light flickers, as you would expect from an old building's elevator. At the moment, there were 3 or 4 people with me going down to the lobby. The elevator went down normally. Then, suddenly, at the 9th floor, the door opened. I saw one of my other friends. Her name is Billy. She was playing, laughing with some kids who I assumed to be her friends. Then she looked at me and smiled. I stared at her for a moment, but I didn't reply.